Welcome to JNUC 2021. It is such a pleasure to be able to talk at this conference, even if it is only virtually this time. My name is Sam Alcock. I'm the product manager for data policy and Windows, and actually like a relatively recent joiner of Jamf coming from Wandera. You may have heard that Wandera was acquired by Jamf just a few months ago. And with that acquisition, Jamf are now able to support lots of new use cases on lots of different devices, one of them being Windows. So today I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that exist. I'll introduce you to some of the new capabilities that now Jamf offer, and I'll show you how they're used on Windows. So to start off with, it's useful to understand some of the changes that organizations are going through as they drive towards digital transformation. First off, organizations are modernizing the workplace by moving to a more hybrid model of working, or even just fully remote. And we know that just over half of all internet traffic originates from mobile networks. This doesn't necessarily mean a phone. We also see, large amounts of LTE-enabled laptops, convertibles, or Wi-Fi devices that use that same mobile infrastructure. Now, this can present a real challenge. How do you protect those users and filter content now that they're outside of your network? Secondly, enterprises are moving increasingly more and more data into the cloud. And this is being driven by the complexity and cost involved in owning and running your own infrastructure. Traditionally, around 20% of network traffic was destined for the internet and cloud-hosted SaaS applications, whereas about 80% was staying internal and on those on-prem apps. This is now totally shifted on its head to about over 80% of traffic heading out to the internet and less than 20% being used on on-prem apps. Organizations want to be able to enable that push towards SaaS apps because it has lots of benefits, but in a way that keeps organizations safe and doesn't impact the end user experience when trying to connect to them. The past year or two have been like no other, and COVID-19 has been a catalyst for driving change. It's had a profound impact on the way we work and also where we work. And you see evidence of that transformation in lots of different places. One of them, like here, is the amount of data being used on productivity tools. But really, the biggest change has been a shift in mindset to a more flexible working pattern with hybrid or remote working. And it's not just a pandemic trend. This is much more of an acceleration of the kind of natural evolution. Gartner released an interesting report showing around 3/4 of CFOs were intending to allow their employees to work remote permanently. So there are clearly big benefits to organizations, and it's really over now to technology on how do we enable that whilst giving the org that same safety net and control. There are some challenges with enabling hybrid working. Users will be shifting from their home to the office to a coffee house, to commuting in between, and I include myself in that, have a really high expectation of connectivity and performance. I don't want to have my work impeded by slow security appliances or lots of multi-factor auth pop-ups. Protecting users whilst living up to their high UX standards can be difficult, but it's never a compromise on the level of protection. You still need to block malicious processes, phishing attacks, dangerous content, irrespective of where that user is in the world. There's also a number of usage-related challenges. Nearly half of usage isn't even on work applications, so now you have to understand where that other 50% is going and if that's okay. Some of it could be going towards unacceptable content like adult, gambling, illegal extreme, for example. Or maybe it's used to share files or use tools that just aren't permitted with your organization. So if your organization uses Dropbox, then it could be suspicious seeing these large file uploads to Google Drive, for example. And finally, it could just be regular unproductive usage like Facebook or Netflix, for example. Of course, some networks like LTE have a monetary usage cost associated with them. And there are lots of examples where Wi-Fi options in an area just aren't good enough or really aren't even there. And that's where we see lots of MiFi devices or SIM-enabled laptops. Finally, how do you make sure that people can actually connect to the applications that they need in order to do their jobs? You've got to make sure that the right people get access to the right tool for their role. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Jamf's new capabilities or sort of the products that are offered, I'm going to take a moment now to briefly introduce them at a high level, and then further on we'll look at how they're applied on the Windows platform and sort of the use cases that they unlock. So the first one is threat defense, and threat defense is our mobile endpoint protection. It's award-winning threat protection for devices, particularly those that exist outside of the perimeter. It's designed to be very performant and transparent to the end user, whilst giving the admin lots of controls. It consists of an on-device and an in-network component, which gives the protection a much more holistic approach. Next is data policy. And the best way to think about data policy is real-time usage reporting and control of data connections. There are lots of ways you can report on and control usage to effectively deliver against acceptable use, shadow IT, or cost control objectives. And finally, we have private access, our zero trust network access product. This is our modern remote access tool designed from the ground up to be more secure, have a better UX than traditional VPNs by leveraging next gen VPN technology. It connects users using any modern OS, like Windows, but also Mac, Android, and iOS to any on-prem or SaaS application. Now, looking more closely at the Windows app itself, which you can just see there on the right. It's very lightweight, mobile-friendly application, and we worked really hard to get the user experience just right. So it really does get out of the way of the user when it's not needed. It's intuitive to navigate and prompts users when needed. We'll see more on the interface a little bit later on, but beyond the UI, the app supports policy for Win32 and UWP apps and can be deployed by any UEM or package manager like SCCM. The deployment itself is actually really neat. It deploys silently in the background without any end user interaction and really just kind of works. Looking at broader compatibility, we run on any form factor. So it could be, desktop, laptop, or convertible. It doesn't matter how your users are connecting. They could be on Wi-Fi, Ethernet, eSIMs, dongles. They could be at home or in the office or at school. And it's also manufacturer agnostic. So any manufacturer is okay. It just needs to run Windows 10 or above. Okay, so into some of the use cases which are unlocked on Windows 10 for those service capabilities. And I mentioned that there is both an on-device and an in-network component to the Windows app. And by having these two work together, we enable a much more consistent and coherent app usage tracking policy, kind of application experience. To understand the capabilities that are unlocked by designing the app this way, it's sort of best articulated by looking at actually how application usage can be tracked and how policy is applied. Okay, so let's imagine that the user opens up an application and starts to browse on it. The Wandera app is able to recognize the process name or executable and map it to a known application. So in this case, the user has opened up Google Chrome, which runs under chrome.exe, which maps to the Chrome app. That then makes a web request out to netflix.com, where it's intercepted by the Jamf security cloud, and that will complete or not depending on the policy defined by the admin. And in this case, the admin's chosen to block Netflix, so the request is not fulfilled. Okay, so now let's pretend the user is desperate for a Netflix binge, and they download the Netflix app just thinking they can get around the policy. Maybe they think it's a browser-only policy. So just like before, the Windows app is able to recognize the process name or executable, map it to known applications. So in this case, the user has opened up the Netflix app, which runs under netflix.exe and maps to the Netflix app. And this is prevented from even making a web request out to netflix.com, since the policy defined covers the entire Netflix entity. Okay, so like looking at another example, which is really common, the user opens up one of the Office 365's applications, which runs under the process office.exe, which maps to the Office app. Now, this then makes a web request out to akamai.com, which is a really common CDN network. It delivers content to Office and a bunch of other websites. Now, you need to be able to look at both the application running and the web request being made in order to fully understand the usage and make the right assessment. And in this case, it's productivity. It's absolutely fine. So we'll allow that to continue. The same web request, however, could also be used to deliver content to something you don't want, such as uTorrent. And in this case, you don't want to block access on the URL akamai.com, but on the application requesting the data. And that's what having that on-device component allows you to do. You can block the app right at the source. So that's how the on-device and in-networks components come together to give that extra level of control and visibility. In terms of how this is made available to administrators, we give you the ability to block entire content categories like adult, extreme, illegal, individual applications like we just saw with Netflix and uTorrent, or specific URLs from within this one screen in Radar. As we just saw, these are applied to both in-browser and source application traffic. And it's through this control that you can these controls you can see on the screen that you can configure policy for Windows and any other platform for that matter. Okay, so now looking at the end user experience and the interaction points users have with the service in terms of data policy. Now, we believe that through empowering users with increased visibility, contextual, timely prompts, and really just staying out of the way when we don't need to be there, you can enforce a usage policy whilst still having that great user experience. And we have lots of customers today that just use the reporting and notification options to increase awareness. And with that alone, they see a drop in overall usage. One of the first ways that we empower users is with this simple usage screen. It shows their megabyte usage per day or per hour, depending on how you've set it up. And it also shows where that usage went by breaking down the usage into the application level below. The reporting is paired really nicely with these end user prompts. So we can tell the user when they're connected to a network which is considered metered and how much usage they've been allowed to use. We can also tell them when a site that's been accessed is not permitted. And same with if they reach a cap. The prompts are particularly useful if an app is being used that is being blocked, since you can't see a block page in a browser. So being notified right as it's being blocked just lets the user know why something isn't loading. And this also has a behavioral benefit that once the user knows something isn't allowed, they'll just stop trying to access it. So we tend to see a sort of natural drop in blocks over time. So hopefully you can see how the combination of delivering timely prompts and making real-time data usage available to the end user just gives greater transparency, better experience, and still allows you to enforce a policy effectively. Finally, this is all reported back to you in the same Radar portal alongside every other device. You can see here the categories, apps, and sites that were used by all devices, not just Windows. And this is true for all the reporting we offer. So usage, sites, and threats, everything like that. Okay, so moving on to threat defense. It's really important to think about threat defense and the security stack as a whole as multiple lines of defense. You wouldn't just have a single line that prevents one attack vector very well to protect against everything. The first line of defense is some kind of endpoint protection. This will scan the device for malicious processes, work in the kernel, either analyze them on device or ship it all off up to the cloud, and action some sort of threat response if something was detected. The next line of defense is the network layer. And this is where we're really strong today. Network solutions scan requests to protect against phishing, connecting to malware and command and control servers, to provide secure access to internal resources on all types of networks. Now, it's important that these two lines of defense work well together, just as it was for tracking app usage earlier on. These should at minimum interoperate and at best integrate to provide a richer level of detail and protection. Looking specifically at Jamf on Windows and the threat defense capabilities, phishing is the number one attack vector out there, with nearly 3/4 of US organizations falling victim to one last year. They're so common because it's the entry point for more advanced attacks. It means that just by blocking phishing, you can prevent a lot of other serious breaches further on down the road. And 96% of phishing attacks arrive via email. Well, hang on, how can all of these phishing attacks be happening when email filters should be filtering them out? This is why those lines of defense are there. This is why those lines of defense are super important. The fact that even though most organizations have email filters, attackers are just sneaky and better at getting around them. Or maybe the 4% that doesn't go via email is just completely unfiltered. So you need to have something in place that captures all network traffic. So attackers are crafty. One of the ways you can get around email filters is by embedding a malicious link in something that looks totally benign, like a PDF or a Word doc. And these are trusted by filters, or typically trusted by filters, so tend to slip right through and make it to the end user device. So here is a Word doc you might receive from your HR team telling you about a change to your health benefit. It could be a big FAQ doc, and all you need to do is click the link to accept the new terms. Seems safe enough. It's not been filtered, so the user would click the link. Now, since the Wandera app was installed and that is scanning all network traffic, it's able to detect that this is a known phishing site and block access to it. It also tell the user with the prompt in the bottom right and report that all back to Radar in real time for you to view. Now, the actual engine that sits behind the scenes and powers this detection is affectionately known as Miriam. And this is something I'm super proud about, of talking about. It's an industry-first AI threat detection mechanism of its kind and has even won some awards. Miriam really sits behind all of our threat defense capabilities for all platforms that we support. And every single web request that gets made is inspected here. And that constant feed of intelligence is one of the reasons how it's able to respond so quickly to 0 days. Miriam has several algorithms in place that detect and block 0 day phishing attacks in real time for all platforms. So even if a site has just come online and not yet on any known phishing list, we're able to detect it and block it. Okay, and finally, looking at the last product area on Jamf for Windows is Jamf Private Access. I don't think it's any secret that most VPNs out there today leave a lot to be desired, and legacy VPNs have struggled in three major ways. The first area is just about how easy they are to manage. They're often very difficult to get up and routing. They might be on-prem, so scaling up and down is slow. You might need to buy more hardware as the business and the connections grow. If they're not on-prem, then even the cloud-hosted applications could be customer tenant architected, making it almost just as difficult to scale. You might even need a whole team of people just to manage your VPN. The next area is just about how secure they are, and it's quite surprising to know that VPNs are just inherently insecure. The surface area for an attack on VPNs is massive. Once you're inside the network, you really have unfettered access to everything. And finally, the sort of dreaded and inevitable end user pushback because of poor usability that VPNs are associated with. Maintaining connectivity whilst out on the road is one thing, but even just moving around the office and connecting to different Wi-Fi hotspots causes, my VPN to drop out and reconnect. Getting that initial connection, getting that tunnel up is an expensive operation, so it can take some time. There's also poor battery performance kind of linked with that VPN tunnel establishment. And so it's not a massive surprise that Gartner predicts that 60% of enterprises will phase out their remote access VPNs in favor of a zero trust network access solution by 2023. Okay, right. So actually looking at Jamf Private Access and the steps we've taken to address the same top three pain points with traditional VPNs, starting with the manageability. The total cost of ownership is reduced by eliminating the need to purchase any hardware or appliances. So there's no certificates to manage, there's no new accounts to set up, no IT workflows to think about. It's horizontally scalable and cloud architected. So to scale up is really just about adding more users. All of the routing is easily configurable through Radar. In terms of security, the solution reduces the surface area of an attack by automatically creating per app microtunnels, which prevents any lateral movement by a would-be attacker. So you don't need to think about setting this bit up. Whenever you add a new app to Radar that should be routed, this will be done in a new per app microtunnel on the end user device. The fact that each user is strongly authenticated and the apps available to them is dictated by their role, it means that only authenticated users get access to just the apps that they need for their role. Combining this with threat defense, we now get risk assertions from inspecting the endpoint and network to drive more advanced policy. So you can restrict access to your most sensitive corporate applications if the device reaches this given risk threshold. Which can be, if you detect a piece of malware or the OS is just too out of date, for example. Finally, end user experience. On the end user side, the app is pushed from a UEM or package manager and installed in the background. They just need to sign in once using Okta or Microsoft, either of which can be federated, and they're good to go. There's no need to keep signing in, and whenever the user logs in, the tunnel's brought up automatically. We know that bringing up that tunnel on legacy VPNs is slow and expensive, and that's just because of how authentication happens when establishing a tunnel. To establish a tunnel, a key exchange needs to take place, which is several requests going back and forth before any data can even be passed down the tunnel. With private access, we use first packet authentication to establish a tunnel in that first request and start sending data immediately. And being a mobile first company, and just like Jamf, really caring about the end user, making sure those connections are quick, reliable, and resilient under poor network conditions is really just a part of our DNA. I said that deployments, I've said a few times, I think, actually, deployments are super easy, but let's take a look at what it's actually like. Once the app is pushed, the user is presented with this screen. And all they need to do is pick a sign-in option, let's say Microsoft. Then they select their account, and that's it. Once they've signed in, the app automatically brings up that tunnel and will just start routing immediately. So stuff like our doc center, which can only be accessed by either logging into Radar or using private access, will work straight away. It really is that easy. It just works. Now, managing Windows is no different from any other platform. It can all be managed and reported on through Radar alongside your mobile deployments. This means that the policies are enforced completely consistently and there's no disparity in reporting. For example, if you choose to block adult, you know that this will happen in the exact same way across every single device. All of these capabilities are delivered through the same application, so you don't need to deploy different apps for different capabilities that I've talked about today. You can deploy the same app, activate it in different modes, and that makes upgrading the service really easy. You don't need to redeploy anything, you just amend the activation profile which was used to kick it off. And that's it. That's how you're able to connect, protect, and control your Windows fleet with Jamf for Windows in a truly unified experience for both the admin and end user alike. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Sam Alcock, Product Manager for Data Policy and Windows. I hope you have a great JNUC 2021. Like and subscribe. Thank you. Goodbye.